Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to an April to May reading wrap up. This reading wrap up is basically going to cover the books that I finished in April. So those are the books that I finished in the Owl's Magical Readathon. So I do have 2 reading vlogs for that. So I'll link those somewhere so you can go and check those out if you're interested in my blow by blow thoughts as I made my way through each of these books. But this video is going to be a wrap up on all that I've read recently. So for the first book that I read before the Owl's Readathon started was the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. Initially I thought this one was a dystopian book, but it's actually a fantasy book and I didn't realize. And I mean, I love fantasy, so it didn't really make a difference to me. But this is a really hard book to describe, but it basically follows a bunch of different perspectives and characters, and there's one perspective told in second person, so that's when the book actually addresses the reader as you. So it's you did this and you did that and you fought this bad guy and you did this. I thought that was going to be really jarring to listen to, but it did it so seamlessly that I didn't really notice it, and I ended up loving it as a result because it was so unique and I hadn't read anything like that before. I do know there's You by Caroline Kepnes, and that's a crime or mystery thriller and it's told by the perspective of a stalker, and I didn't really want to read something like that in second person because I think it would be a bit too creepy for me, but I did really like the way it was done in this book for sure. This was amazing. I really love this book. I can't really tell you too much about the plot of this one without giving stuff away. Even though it is the first book, the more you know about it, obviously the more it's going to spoil you. So the basic kind of structure of this book is that we follow a few different characters, which I've said already, but they are learning a magic system and they're learning how to function in this world that is run by guardians as well, and you don't really understand what a guardian is, so it kind of explores the characters as they uncover their capacity and their abilities and the magic system, and it deals with politics of the guardians all at the same time, and you realize how much threat is in this book. It's really interesting and how much the characters need to survive. I was going to tell you about the actual title and how that kind of linked in with the story, but I can't really tell you what that means because it's also kind of a spoiler. So I can tell you a little bit about the magic system, and it is that characters in this story who have magic are kind of shunned and they're considered kind of monsters, I suppose. They also play a key role in society, and I don't want to give that away either, but they basically control the earthquakes that happen in the world, and they can control different levels and different capacities of them. So not every character can control an earthquake and stop things from being damaged, but they kind of have different levels of control in that regard. This is going to sound ridiculous because I can't really give you a proper synopsis of this story, but to basically wrap this one up, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it to death. I can't wait to continue this. I think it's a trilogy, so there are 2 other books after this one, and I did listen to this on audiobook and I really loved it on audiobook. The diversity in this is absolutely stunning. I barely noticed it. It was just part of who the characters were, and it really linked in with the key elements to the story, which I really loved. And I also didn't see anything coming in this book. A lot of it was a surprise to me, and I really love that as well. So 5 out of 5 stars, would highly recommend. Love this one. The next books are all going to be out of order because I've just kind of shoved them into a stack so that I can grab them and talk about them. And if you want to watch my thoughts in order, then check out my vlogs. But the first one that I want to talk about is Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and this is about a boy who exists in conjunction with the Fae world. So it's a real life scenario in a farmland situation, and he sees a falling star and then he goes to find this star, and the star turns out to be a woman. And I thought it would be kind of mystical and magical and intriguing. I really like Neil Gaiman's storytelling, but I really don't enjoy his writing, so I didn't really love this one as much as I wanted to, and I wasn't really enthralled with the plot. I felt that even though the pace was fine, I just didn't get interested. I couldn't find much tension going on in this one, and I just don't think that I'm into fae or fairy things at all really, so this was a bit of a miss for me. I did say in my reading vlog that I was going to stop reading Neil Gaiman's books because I want to love them, and I loved the Doctor Who episodes that he wrote when I used to watch Doctor Who, but I just can't get on board with his fiction. I've read this one, American Gods and Norse mythology, and I'm just not a fan. So I might try and read some of his non-fiction where he talks about writing and creative process, because I feel like I'll get a lot more out of those ones. But when it comes to Stardust, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm just ready to move on. So the next 2 books are young adult fantasy books, and they are King's Cage and Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard. And I read King's Cage for the Owl's Readathon, and I just recently finished Warstorm on audiobook as well. So I have finished this series, and this was on my priority list to read this year, so I'm feeling very accomplished that I finished these. I just wished I loved them a lot more than I actually did. I think when I read the first book, I just got really obsessed with it, and it kind of went on a bit of a downhill spiral from there. These books, if you don't know, they follow a girl named Mare Barrow, and she is a red and a working red, and she lives in a world of silvers, and they are the higher class. All of the silvers have special abilities, like X-Men like abilities, and then Mare realizes that she might have an ability as well. So it sounds like a very generic kind of young adult story. It's something that you can just pick up and read, and it's really trashy and really easy to get into. I don't think trashy is the right word, but it's kind of the vibe that I was going for when I picked up Red Queen. I loved the characters at the beginning, and even though it sounded tropey, it actually surprised me with a few things that it did in Red Queen, and I wanted those surprises to continue throughout the series, but it just didn't really happen for me. There were a couple of characters, maybe 2 or 3 in these last 2 books that I really liked, and they actually had a lot of depth for me, but we got introduced to so many characters, there were so many perspectives in this, and I just didn't really get on board with all of them at all. I found several of them to be very bratty, and that's fine if they're going to develop and become different later. Like in Skyward at the beginning, I found Spencer really frustrating to read from because she seemed just very grumpy and angry all the time, but she really grew and became someone new, and that didn't happen with the characters in this series, even though they're fighting a war. And so it's a lot of emotional growth that has potential to happen, but I just didn't find that with all of the characters in this one. So I ended up giving these 3 to 3.5 stars each. I didn't really like them that much, but I'm going to keep them anyway. I did really love Red Queen, so that is a series over for me, and it's no longer lingering on my TBR pile. Next, I read X-Men Volume 1 Gifted, and this is a comic I read for the History of Magic prompt in my Owls Readathon vlog, and this was because it was over 10 years old. I, as a result, didn't really follow a lot of what was going on in this one because it linked to a lot of different volumes and a lot of different characters in other volumes. So we have one character that we found in this that we thought was dead in another volume, and I didn't really get the emotional impact of the characters' reactions to this revelation because even though it's volume 1, it obviously had a lot more backstory and build up than I anticipated that it did. This volume basically deals with the X-Men in the Academy, and somebody has created a cure to X-Men powers. So that could potentially be a very powerful ally or enemy to the X-Men depending on what kind of ability they have. So I found it quite interesting conceptually, but I just couldn't really again get behind some of the characters in this book, unfortunately. There were a few key characters that I liked, but I really wanted a bit more depth and a bit more background and more panels of them to read from. So this one ended up being about a 4 stars for me. I do like comics, I do love X-Men, and I do love the Marvel Universe, so I'm keen to continue, maybe not with this series, or maybe with this series, or maybe with some of the volumes that link into this series, because I really like the direction of where it was going, but I just didn't really get the depth of the story that I wanted to. Sorry if that was a weird cut, the camera battery just ran out, so we had to replace it, but we're back on schedule and I'll talk about the rest of the books that I read. Next up, I also read a graphic novel, and it is Sweet Tooth Volume 3, and I'm really liking this series. It's a pretty dark dystopian series about an apocalypse that swept the world, and as a result people are trying to survive. And this young boy who is on the cover, I don't actually remember his proper name, but he's called Sweet Tooth because he loves chocolate, and he is a boy that is born longer than the apocalypse started. So the apocalypse started about 7 or 8 years ago, and he's about 9 years old. And the apocalypse kind of affected the human population in that when they have kids now, they're kind of tainted by an animal forms. Obviously he has antlers, and there's a bunch of kids in this particular volume that have different kind of traits of animals, and you meet them in this camp. And I can't really tell you how Sweet Tooth got to this camp, but the characters that he met along the way and the characters and relationships that he's built from this camp, and then at the end of this volume, it really kind of created a turning point for the story for me. And this volume does mark halfway through this series. I believe there's about 6 volumes, so I'm really looking forward to diving further into this series and hopefully finishing it soon, because this volume really expanded on the characterization and the grief and the craziness, and there was a bit of cult-like vibes in this as well, and I really like that richness in a story. Even if it's not the overarching theme, I do like how it plays into things and how it creates this sense of fear. And I can't really say much more about it without spoiling what happens to the characters, so I'm gonna stop there. But I gave this volume a 4 out of 5 stars, again like the X-Men volume, and I really liked it. I can't wait to continue, and I'm really enjoying this series. It's a great graphic novel series. Oh, next I read another graphic novel, and it is Saga Volume 9, and this volume absolutely broke my heart. It was incredible. I loved it so much. This series follows 2 characters from a warring moon and a warring planet, and they were soldiers on the front lines, and they fell in love and then had a baby, and the baby named Hazel basically narrates this series, even though the 2 characters that have are her parents are pretty present in the series as well. So we get to see a lot of family dynamic and dysfunctional family dynamic, and a lot of love from these characters, as well as the people that they run into when they're trying to escape from being persecuted. And they're trying to escape persecution because their two races are actually enemies and they're not allowed to get together at all. It's forbidden, and so they're trying to keep their daughter Hazel safe because they don't want her to get killed. There were so many moments in this volume that I didn't expect, and that really kind of expanded on the nuance of character. And there were so many little lines and little moments and so many shocking moments as well that really kind of, like Sweet Tooth, drove it to a real turning point. And I feel like this was a pretty pinnacle volume, and it tied all of the other volumes into just this one concentrated story, and I really love that about it. I really want to go back and reread all of the volumes up to this one again, because I think that it would make a much more rich experience for the story. And also I love the art in this series and I can't get enough of it, so I'd love to reread it for that reason as well. Fiona Staples is incredible and I adore her illustration style. Obviously I ended up giving this one a 5 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I read Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, and I really liked this one, even though I didn't give it a full 5 out of 5 stars. Something about the pacing and the plot held me back a little bit from doing that, even though I liked the world and the story and the characters overall. This is an adult fiction urban fantasy book, and it follows a police officer in London, obviously Rivers of London, and this detective police officer is just becoming part of the police force, and he has to kind of solve this murder that he's been thrown into. And at the same time he discovers that there are actually ghosts and there's magic, and a whole subculture of magic exists in London, and so he's trying to link that to the crime that he's trying to solve and use both facets of the magic and the non-magic system to solve murders. And lo and behold, he finds out that there is actually a magic faction to the police force as well. So it was just really multifaceted and interesting, and I like the magic system in this because you can't find out about magic and then suddenly learn it like in Harry Potter. You don't just pick up a wand and bam, you know how to do spells. This was very nuanced, and there needed to be a lot of growth when you brought magic into your life. So he's training and training and training and trying to picture things and verbalize them so that he can do magic himself. And I really like that there was a struggle and a sense of earning when it came to magic in this book. That's one of the things that I really liked. It seemed to be a very deep magic system, which is really awesome. I was honestly more interested, obviously, in the magic system than I was in the mystery murder element of this book. I think it could have been a lot stronger, but I did like it regardless, and it was really eerie and really creepy. But I wish it was more. A lot of the books that I read in April-May, I kind of wanted more from them, which is a bit of a shame, but I did like this story overall and I'm eager to continue. I listened to this one on audiobook and the narrator was great. But before I wrap up talking about this book, I actually saw online that Simon Pegg wants to make a TV adaptation for this book, and I think this will translate brilliantly into TV, and it needs kind of that tightening of the storyline in a TV episode in order to become, I think, really, really good. Not that it wasn't a good book in general, but I think tightening it and making it more tense and making things more concentrated about the story will really do it benefit. And I know that the author is involved with Simon Pegg to create the show, so I'm hoping that with the influence of both of them, that the storyline and the mystery element to the book will become tighter, because I really wanted that to be so much better, and I would have given it 5 stars if I had loved that aspect of it more. So again, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I can't wait for the adaptation, and I really love the world that this is in. And I know that Rivers of London was technically the last book that I have read, and that is true, that's the last book I finished, but I also started Sabriel by Garth Nix for my Owls Readathon. I have about 150 pages of this one left. This is a young adult fantasy focusing on a necromancer named Sabriel, and I like this story. It's not as tropey as I expected, which is a really good sign. It took a little bit for the story to take off. I found the beginning pretty slow in pace, but now that it's more than halfway through and I've got about 100-ish pages left, I'm really liking the characters and the people that we've met so far. I think they've added a richness to the story that I just wasn't getting from Sabriel alone, because now she can actually interact with people and use her magic a little bit more, and that's what I'm really liking. So hopefully I'll finish this really soon. You'll probably see it in my next wrap-up video that I film, but I just wanted to mention that I was reading it because I did mention it throughout my reading vlogs, and I thought I should actually come full circle and tell you what happened because I didn't finish it. Additionally, I didn't actually mention this in my quarterly TBR video, but I do want to read The Night Circus this year, and I have started the audiobook for this one and I'm really loving it. It's not actually what I expected. It does involve a lot of magic and it does involve a circus, but I didn't expect the time period that it was set in, and I didn't expect it to be multiple narrators. It has a few characters set to the backdrop of this looming contest between these two magic users as they're growing up and discovering how to use magic and interact with the circus. And so I'm not really sure how all the ends are going to tie in because I'm only almost a third of the way through this, but I'm really liking it regardless. At the moment it's probably about a 4 stars for me. I really want to give it a 5 stars, so I'm hoping that the story really picks up, but I'm really liking this one as well and I'm listening to it on audiobook. And then finally, I'm reading Nightblood, and I have put this down because I picked up Sabriel and I haven't picked it up since. So I'm hoping that this young adult fantasy will be read by me soon because I'm not halfway through it yet, but I'm close. So I'm keen to get this one off my TBR as well. And like with the Red Queen series, this is the last book in a young adult fantasy, so I'm keen to finish that series as well on my shelf so I don't have it sitting there unread any longer. So these are all the books that I've talked about in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've read any of them, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to chat with you as always, and I love to hear what you think as well. I also did an unhaul recently on my channel and I got my TBR down from 125 unread books to 88, and now that I've started reading the Night Circus, that is now down to 87. So I'm well on my way to getting under 50 books this year, so let's hope that happens. I should go and put these books down now. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye!